Good evening, Rolling Meadows. Helps to have a mic. Good evening, Rolling Meadows. This is the February 19th, 2019 Committee of the Whole meeting. I believe Mr. Comstock is supposed to start it out with storms. Mr. Comstock, you are on right now.
Thank you very much, Mayor. And actually, this is the second part of our conversation with ComEd. Joe Turnage is back to do additional information. And obviously, some of the open-ended items that we had from the last time, he is back to talk about. I know that Joe has brought some company this time with him. And actually, part of his company is here to discuss. In December of 2018, there was a forum workshop that ComEd actually talked about their lessons learned overall from the storm that we had. But with that, I will give that as the intro before Joe and everybody comes back up. You do have in the packet in front of you the additional questions that were out there, and obviously Public Works Director Fred Rote and I are here for additional comments.
Joe, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good evening, Council. Thank you for having us back today. We did make a commitment that we'll come back and speak to you and follow up regarding the questions that you had from the last meeting. So I have my team here today. I have Rama Noguera, who's our Director of External Affairs. He'll speak to you about the storm that occurred in December. And I also have two directors from our operations group so that we can answer any technical questions that you may have. So I'll turn it over to Rama at this time. Thank you.
Good evening, Council. Good evening, everyone. So first, I just
sir,
like...
Could you just introduce yourself into the mic for the record, please?
Yes, for the record. Yes, Rama Noguera. I'm the Director of External Affairs.
Thank you.
Okay. So, good evening, everyone. Thank you for having us the opportunity to speak about the storm that occurred in November. This was the November 25th storm. Just wanted to, following on your comments that shortly after that storm, our executives did directly engage at two different councils of government, which included the DuPage Mayors and Managers COG, as well as the Northwest Municipal Conference, where the members that was very well participated, had the opportunity to directly provide us their experience and the feedback to us. And unfortunately, the City of Rolling Meadows wasn't able to participate, and therefore we're here today to share some of the same information that was shared at those two COG meetings back in December. Okay? So first, I just wanted to start off with talking about the storm itself. It was named Bruce, if you recall. It happened during that Thanksgiving weekend, right? So the Weather Services had already provided an alert that we had a winter storm coming our way, and that was as early as Friday. Per our protocols, we started to staff up, anticipating that we were going to get something over the weekend. It was, forecast to be around the Sunday, so we put additional crews for that weekend. Especially being a holiday weekend, we tend to be very conservative about that, so we wanted to put additional crews regardless, but this storm made us put additional resources out there. Saturday came, the forecast changed more of a warning, and then by Sunday, the alerts had changed into a blizzard warning. And then it turned out to be a very, very significant storm system that came and impacted the greater part of the states that surround us. It impacted the Midwest states, extending all the way to the northeast part of the U.S. Just to give you just an appreciation, I know that a lot of the municipalities with the Public Works Department, they were challenged by the effects of the system as well. Just to remind you, this was a very severe storm. They were attributed to 3 deaths. About 3,000 flights were canceled during that weekend, one of the busiest travel weekends in the year. And what made this storm particularly challenging were, just a combination of four ingredients. One, it was a lot of snow, right? I think in this area we got about 13 inches of snow. But it wasn't just that, nice fluffy snow. It was wet. Well, it's this had a combination of rain in there too. And not only that, but throughout the night it began to ice. And so we had an ice accretion form more than 1 inch in many areas. And that's significant because that starts to pull down the weight on trees, limbs start falling on our equipment. It impacts our equipment directly. Now, if that weren't enough, we were also facing 52-mile-an-hour wind gusts with 36-mile-an-hour sustainable wind speeds. That in itself, without snow, without ice, is significant. So that you added that to those ingredients. And finally, just in our experience in managing winter storms is that typically when you have that kind of a snowfall, it usually is followed by a thaw, right? With this storm, it went the other way. We immediately got sub-freezing temperatures, which made it more challenging. So just, wanted to kind of remind us what happened during that storm. The end effect, what happened for the Committe service territory is that about 300,000 customers were impacted. We had 300,000 customers approximately that lost their power due to this event. Now, the other thing that I want to say is that a lot of people don't like to hear that it could have been worse, but I'm going to say it could have been worse. And the reason for that is that we took a look at we compared a similar storm, and we had to go back to as far as 1998 to find a similar storm that was compared to the one that came by last year. And that system had an impact of over 860,000 customers in our service territory. The difference is that the dividends paid off for the investments that we made over the past 10 years due to the the EIMA, Electric Modernization Act, and that allowed us to invest so much in the system, into the infrastructure. So I know that, nobody wants to hear, but it could have been worse. So we were happy to see how well the system stood up to a storm like that. Just this area alone was in the path of the worst hit areas. Okay, this is it really was an angled path that started around the east northwest part of Cook County, northeast part of DuPage, and it traveled northwest across Lake County and into McHenry. There was the area that was strongest hit, and obviously the city of Rolling Meadows was in that path. Rolling Meadows ended up with about 875 customers that were impacted by the storm effects. Okay, so what I would like to do is just I want to quickly move into some of the items that came out of the conversations at the COGS. But one of the things that we wanted to stress is just after storms like these, we do take a look and self-assess as far as what worked well, what didn't work well. Just on the positive front, again, the system held up better than it would have if we hadn't made those investments. So that was one. Within a 48-hour period, in spite of all the challenges that we had, and I'm going to talk about some more of these challenges in a little bit, but we were able to restore about 91% of our customers within the first 48 hours. And then finally, in spite of those challenging conditions, we also did not have any safety incidents with our crews, our contractors, our mutual assistance crews that came over to help us, and that is very important to us, and so that was a positive. So let me talk about the challenges, right? So one of the things that I just wanted to talk about just really briefly is our process of getting mutual assistance. For a storm as severe as this, when we know that something significant is coming our way, we are on the phones with our neighboring utilities to provide us assistance. Because this storm system was so spread out, everybody around us, all the states around us, were basically bracing for the impact, and they didn't know exactly how they were going to be impacted. So no one was willing to release any resources. So we had to wait until after the storm went through to assess which utilities had the ability to spare resources so they can send them our way. Because typically in a summer storm, we would be able to have gotten more of those resources much earlier. So, but we did mobilize a couple of our utilities out east. They're part of the Exelon family. Pico and Baltimore were able to provide us those crews, but it takes them 2 days to travel. They have to come in with their own trucks, their own equipment, and they also had to go through the storm system as well. So there was that challenge that obviously we would have liked to have those resources sooner, but that we had to wait until we had our neighboring utilities see how the system impacted them before we got those commitments to get those crews. Once we finally got the resources in our service territory, we were working with 1,170 crews. That was a combination of our own crews, contract crews, and the mutual assistance crews that came from other utilities. Okay. The other challenge was the crew mobility. So even the crews that were on property, 6 in the morning, we want them out the door and start working on the priority feeders. But as you remember, especially the folks from Public Works, a lot of the roads had not been plowed. The snow was still coming down, and so it was just challenging getting to the destination for many of our crews. The other item that we do immediately is we do a damage assessment. We had about 260 patrollers that go out and do damage assessment to get an idea of the extent of the damage, so that we know what material, what resources, what equipment we're going to need in order to do the work. But again, they were having trouble getting out to those destinations, and everything on that first day, which is the critical day when we want to start with the storm recovery, it was slow going. Okay, and then finally, on top of all this, we found out that later on Monday, I recall that through feedback to our folks like Joe, that some of our systems were not working. So now we were having IT system issues that were being overwhelmed by the volume of calls that we were getting and the interaction. So we were having issues with our outage map that wasn't accurately reflecting our restoration times, and our Committe.com and the associated mobile app, they were having, a lot of our customers notified us that they were having issues getting logged out or not being able to log in. And then also internally, we were having some issues with our operations management system, which is what we use to issue the tickets for the crews to mobilize on. And then finally, the item that we, again, self-assessing that we could have done better is communicate earlier. Waited too long to issue a press release. If you recall, it wasn't until really late Monday when we finally issued a press release to notifying the public that this was a multi-day storm. This was a severe storm, and the feedback that we got was that we could have done that much sooner. Okay, so the two meetings really provided us, with the COGS, provided us some real valuable input directly from your peer municipalities, and they were very engaged and very good discussions that took place there. So we took a lot of notes. And a lot of the opportunities that we got to look at it into our processes, our protocols, our systems. And we also had an internal meeting within ComEd that engaged the more than 160 storm responders. These are the folks that work the strategy, the plan, and we wanted to get that team together to also do a self-assessment of what could have been done better. We follow a robust after action improvement planning cycle similar to FEMA and other large emergency response organizations. So that was led by Rob Forney, our Director of Emergency Preparedness. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share with you the improvement opportunities that we are evaluating that were a result of both the feedback that we got from the COGS and the self-assessment that we had in the middle of December. Okay, so these fell into 5 different categories. It was communications, logistics, operations, planning, and technology. Okay, a lot of this was in the communications. A lot of the opportunities came out in the communications. So, communicating to customers and municipalities earlier in the storm, and the anticipated duration of the outages. That was clear. That was the number one thing that most of the municipalities that attended those COGS said. It's like, we understand the severity of the storm, but you could have told us sooner that how severe it was and that it was going to be a multiple-day storm. That was the number one feedback that we got from them. Improved communications of estimated time of restorations. Improved social media escalation process. Currently, more and more of our customers are using social media to communicate with us, to engage with us. And we need to have a better way of translating the social media interaction to actionable tickets to restore these customers. So that was an area of improvement opportunity. Improve the communication prioritization of reported low-hanging wires. We had a discussion at the COGS with some of the first responders that were getting tied up in some wires down, especially in some busy intersections. That and so the feedback was we got to be better at prioritizing these wires down. In a storm like this with so much ice, we had a lot of wires down, and so there was no way that we were going to be able to put all the resources on those wires down. So we have to have a better way of prioritizing them. Provide municipality storm updates on more frequent and a timely basis, and improve communications of crews actively working within the communities. Some of the folks were very concerned that we weren't, that the visibility of our crews is very necessary for the residents. They would just like to see where are the crews, right? It doesn't seem like my town is being paid attention, we're being neglected, when in fact there were crews. It's just not in your front yard, but your municipality, your town has these crews. And so just communicating that more effectively was the feedback that we got. From a logistics perspective, it's review the municipal priority customer list for revisions, especially those indicating generator availability. As you know, some of your facilities have critical facilities. You guys have generators. A lot of our municipalities have generators. When we were in that storm, we found out there were some discrepancies in that list, and so we got to make sure that we are on top of that so that we don't find any of this discrepancies during the storm. Consider the modification of the Joint Operations Center activation protocols. So, as you know, the Northwest Municipal Conference actually started this concept of the Joint Operating Center. We drill every year. It has specific thresholds when we activate, and we were very surprised that those thresholds were not surpassed with the storm. We came very close. The feedback that we got from the municipalities at the COG was, well, there were some areas that you should have activated the JOC. You shouldn't have waited for that threshold to be reached, because we could have used that JOC to better communicate the information. Right? So, and so what we're looking into now is what we're looking at more of a scalable type of response that, maybe for the most part we adhere to the thresholds, but there may be certain situations where the JOC is going to be valuable to open up for better communicating and engaging with the municipalities. On the planning perspective, it was a lot about the wires down. enhanced process for staffing wire watching and damage assessment activities, refined process for communications of non-ComEd down wires. So one of the things that we found out at the later part of the storm is that a lot of folks, first responders, even us, were sitting on stuff that wasn't ComEd. It was cable. And so, so again, we need to be better at communicating and ensuring that folks understand that that's not a ComEd issue, so that your first responders are not tied up unnecessarily. And then enhance wire watching application to collect data from our wire watchers. So our wire watchers out there have this app, a mobile app that they fill out when they arrive, et cetera, et cetera. They give us a lot of intel. There's probably an opportunity for them to provide us more intel because they're there, more intel regarding the damage that they see. So those are opportunities that we want to leverage. And then finally, on the technology, enhance municipal portal availability. Again, because of the system issues, we were having some challenges with the availability of the portal. Improve resiliency and accessibility of Committe.com outage map by the public during high volume events. So we want to make sure that when we have a big event, we know that there's going to be a lot of traffic, and we got to make sure that our systems can hold up to that level of interface. And then maintenance error messaging to customers in the event that we are having system issues. So proactively state our systems are not working. So right, because it took a while before customers actually understood that our systems were down, and so we got to put in a process in place so that we can communicate that proactively, and then develop a backup or contingency plan if technology fails. So we got to have a plan B. Okay, so these, in summary, in high level, are the items that came out of the discussions with the COGS, including the Northwest Municipal Conference and the items that we're actively going after. So at this point, I'm going to pause, and I'm going to give an opportunity to answer any questions.
So, questions? Ms. Majenkins, please.
Thank you. So out of all that, I didn't hear anything about something that Joe had mentioned last time he was here, about the spacer cables. There's ComEd's been using them since 2008, but a lot of our area does not have it. So there was talk about the fact that you'd be evaluating, looking into it, and that maybe in the spring, summer, we'd be looking to put these in our area. Where are we at with that? What are we doing with that? Because from what the notes from our last meeting with you guys, with Joe, it shows that the improvements, their performance improvements range up to 89%, 80 to 90%, which is significant. So just where are we with that?
Oh, Craig Creaming, and our operations director.
He's been dying to come talk.
He's been, yes.
So specifically, Craig Creamian, Director of Electric Operations for our North Region.
I mean, there are people at home that are dying to hear you speak, so they just want to make sure they know who you are.
Very good. And so two feeders, Echo 698, 699, particularly troublesome veg-related type outages. We come to you and we said that we are doing some enhanced trimming the last time was going to be our plan, as well as then some targeted spacer cables. And in the reassessment after this storm, we've kind of went in and looked at our prioritization and our budget spend, and actually we're going to come back in and do some targeted underground in some of the areas. So we've kind of recrafted that. Basically, we're going to commit to doing a little bit more here with the targeted undergrounding. So I don't have those specifics on the exact locations today, but I do know that that has been a change since last time we were here, as we've pulled in some more dollars, looked at some more storm hardening, some more resiliency, and we are going to do some targeted undergrounding in addition to the spacer cable here and on these two feeders.
And is this something that you're thinking still like this spring, summer target time, or within this year? Or?
For the spacer cable and enhanced trimming work, that would be in this year. The stuff that we do, the targeted underground, be a much more expensive, longer project, 2020. And so that's a little bit of the trade-off but we wanted to get a longer-term solution in, and so basically that's the trade-off we made. We said, and would we would we rather go with some spacer cable, maybe a less expensive option, try to get it here, or if we wait to the 2020 funding cycle, we can get some targeted underground, be more expensive for us, but a better long-term option. So that's what we're looking at.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions from council? You get a chance at either one of them. So, well, thank you, gentlemen. It was easier than you thought it was going to be, right? That moves us along to the comprehensive plan update. Mr. Volt, I believe you have the microphone.
Well, actually, as Public Works Director Fred Vogt walks up, it's actually going to be a presentation by, or the intro is going to be Public Works Director Fred Vogt, and then he's going to turn over to Michael Blue, that you all know from Tesca, another opportunity. And before he actually starts, I would want to remind people tomorrow night, that's February 20th at 7:30, there's another opportunity for another discussion item on this comprehensive plan. It's been a long time. It is a plan. It's a working document that we live off. The old one we lived off a long time. For people who lived through that 2006 one, obviously it served us for a long time. We're hoping this will be the same thing, but it has a different feel. It's completely different from when the Lakota group did theirs. Tesca has a different mythology that they do with it, and we do appreciate all the people who have given feedback. We do appreciate all the different groups that have come. Alderman Majikis, who is representing obviously the council, but also the Economic Development Committee for a bunch of the meetings. But we do appreciate everybody who's done it. And with that, we do turn it over to Public Works Director Fred Vogt.
Thank you, Barry. And just to point out for a moment, when this endeavor started last summer, and we rolled out the carpet, so to speak, at the September Friday's Rock and the Duck Race with regards to the public input process starting. We've had 12 public input opportunities, counting the ad hoc committees, the hearings that were held last week, the workshop tomorrow night, the continued Plan Commission hearing that will be reconvened on March 5th for this comprehensive plan update. So one of the reasons that the Planning and Zoning Commission is having a workshop tomorrow night was that at the February 5th meeting, there was a feeling that we should make another attempt to get the word out there, particularly with some groups that maybe have not been heard. So staff has been doing that, working with reaching out to some in the community that may not have been aware of it or that we haven't heard from. As we went through our focus group, stakeholders, the 400 plus online survey responses that the consultant got. We had the exhibit boards down in the lobby of City Hall for several weeks back in November. So we hope to at least feel that we've put the opportunity out there and then some to get public input on this effort. Michael Blue is here tonight to walk you through a briefer or a summary, I guess, presentation, shall I say, from the one that he and his staff presented to the committee, to the Planning and Zoning Commission on February 5th. We certainly encourage comments from the mayor and council tonight, or if you wish to follow up after the presentation and discussion, send us by email or telephone or in person, however you wish in the upcoming weeks, so that we can have a meaningful document that everyone felt that they had the opportunity to participate in. And with that, I'll turn it over to Michael.
Good evening.
Hi there, Michael. If you would just, again, introduce yourself and tell us who you are. Because the folks we may know, but the folks that are listening out there are telling me they'd like to know who the speakers are that come to the podium.
Fair enough. I'm Michael Blue. I'm a principal consultant with Tesca Associates. We're in Evanston, Illinois. I've been with Tesca for about 6 years. The firm has been doing comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances and urban design for the past 40 plus years. So we've got quite a bit of history in the area. And again, I thank you for the opportunity to be with you tonight to talk about the comprehensive plan. As Fred mentioned, we went into quite a bit of depth of it at the public hearing. Tonight, what I want to do in the interest of time is talk a little bit more of the breadth of the comprehensive plan. What are the things that have been addressed? And again, any questions you have, any things we want to talk about, we can certainly go into that if that's all right.
Certainly.
That works. First and foremost, you should know that to build on what you heard from both Barry and Fred, is that the plan was a terrific effort because it involved so many residents. It involved your plan commission. It involved members from an ad hoc committee who helped participate, and it involved those members of your staff. When we do these comprehensive plans for communities, when communities get together, and I'll talk a little bit about what a plan is in a minute, but when communities get together and do this, you don't always have all these people involved. That's unfortunate, but it happens. But the level of involvement from the community, the staff, and the Planning and Zoning Commission, we're really above and beyond what we typically see. So before we even get anywhere into this, I want you all to feel very, very good about that. Sorry for the y'all. I was in Alabama yesterday. So why do communities go through and do a comprehensive plan? Well, things have changed since 2006. I don't think we have to go into much about that. That's pretty obvious. There's a new economy. There's a lot of new things that are going on. There are long-term ideas to look at. A lot of the things that are in the plan are about starting a conversation. It's a chance to bring people together. We worked with the park districts, the school districts. There are a lot of people that were involved in this plan. They were all part of it because they provide services to your residents that are a big part of your community as well. The biggest part of this, too, is just to celebrate the community and to celebrate the successes that you've had, that you're going to have, and just the process. It's a policy document. It is not a to-do list for 2019 and 2020. There are a number of recommendations in it for things that the city ought to look at doing. But I will tell you now what I will tell you again at the end. There are 3 ways that a plan gets implemented, right? One is at budget time, because that's really when you all put your policies together. How are you going to spend the funds that the city has? It's a chance to make some determinations when development proposals come before you, and it's a chance to look for and respond to opportunities, or as I like to say, spending other people's money, right? There are grant opportunities are out there. The comprehensive plan is implemented through those 3 things. So keep that in mind as we run through what we're doing here. The plan starts with a technical aspect, a community analysis that we look at from our standpoint. I should tell you, too, I should have already told you that in addition to TESCA, we were joined by AECOM, which is a large multidisciplinary firm. We had one of the economists lead their group to look at the market analysis that was part of the plan. Sorry, I should have mentioned that earlier. There was significant public engagement, as you already heard about. There's a community vision, kinds of sums up where are we going and what do we want to do. There are a few sub areas that we looked at in a little bit more detail because a lot of the community is not going to change. And then there's some ideas for adoption. The existing condition stuff is a lot of data. People who like data can get really into this. I will point out that 2 or 3 things that really resonate to us and that I wanted to point out to you. On the right side of the screen here is the existing land use map. So these are what's on the ground now in Rolling Meadows. Yellow is single-family residential, the red is commercial, the purple is industrial. What's great about this map is that you see that Rolling Meadows is not one kind of town. It is not a bedroom community. It is a community with a lot of bedrooms in it, but it's also got a lot of industry and commerce. And that industry and commerce is located at the north end and at the south end, so that the folks who live in the middle are really not burdened by a lot of the traffic, the noise, the things that come with that. And that's really what jumps out at us with this kind of map. In terms of demographics, in terms of population, the city is very much like the rest of the county and the region in terms of who the people are and what the incomes are and the education and that sort of thing. And typically, when I do this part of the presentation, I go even faster than this because none of this should be really much of a surprise to the folks in the community. This is a chart that shows the public engagement that we went through with the process. The one thing of this that's really important is that you'll see it went all the way from July, and it doesn't stop until next month when we hope that it gets adopted. The engagement, the involvement of the community is an ongoing part of this process. What did we learn? This is detailed in one of the chapters of the plan, and this screen sums it up. We found that people really like living here. We found that people consider it friendly. You see the words in the word cloud there. It's a quiet, safe, friendly, affordable, convenient community. The access that people have to so many things is really valued here. We found that a lot of people who responded to the survey that was part of the internet have either lived here their whole lives or were born here, raised here, and then came back. That's significant. That tells you a lot about how desirable the community is. In terms of the vision and goals, I skipped past the vision because I don't want to dwell on it. But again, this is a combination of what's valuable to the city now and what we hope and what the Plan Commission Ad Hoc Committee hoped would be added in the future. And I'll leave you to read that a little later. What I want to talk about just briefly here are the visions and goals that were developed with the Planning and Zoning Commission and the Ad Hoc Committee in these categories that you see here. Sense of place, people, a great place to be, getting around, environment, and infrastructure. These cover all the topics that you typically see in a comprehensive plan, but we've really tried to present them here as a little bit more of a story, as something that's a little bit more readable, something that really reflects what we heard from the residents of the community about that small town feel and how they like it. So rather than being overly technical and kind of dry, we shot for a little more readable. Again, just to try and cover the breadth briefly, and we can talk about anything in further detail that you like. But the first of these 5 areas was sense of place. We focused on sense of place in these categories, these topics that you see up here. Housing is, of course, very important. This also includes a bit of the history of the community. It talks about what happened with the community pride, community safety, community appearance. We talked about gateway and wayfinding. That's one of the ones I want to stop on. There's an opportunity as communities develop and as communities kind of refresh themselves to look at how they look and how they feel and what is their character. And gateway signs are something that the city's actually putting a lot of energy into right now, and we think, frankly, quite successfully. The sister to that is a wayfinding program, where it's also signs like that, and there's some examples, photos in the plan that talk about, well, how do you find all the good things that are here? We heard from a lot of people that, oh, you know, the library's great, but you know what? First time I ever tried to find it, I couldn't find it. And Kimball Hill Park, oh, it's the jewel of the community. Nobody's quite sure how to get there, right? And so this idea of wayfinding and highlighting what's really wonderful about the community is a bit of a theme that you'll see as you read the plan. One thing we did in the document that, frankly, we don't typically do was we had these spotlights. And as you read it, if you haven't had a chance yet, you'll see that these community spotlights are throughout the plan, highlighting some of the things that we heard from the community that they really enjoy here. Part of the purpose of this document, if you haven't printed it, it's that thick and it's an attractive document, is to be for your residents, for your fellow jurisdictions, for the schools and the parks, for prospective businesses, for prospective developers, to really understand what you've got going for yourselves here. And that's part of what the plan shares. So there's a chapter on people. And in terms of people and what it means in this comprehensive plan is that it's all those people that go into creating the quality of life, the environment for business, that serves the businesses and the residents of Rolling Meadows. And we go into some detail on all of these groups. I'm not going to do it today, but you know, part of this is the fact that we live in Illinois and we have more taxing jurisdictions in Illinois than any other state in the country, right? Everybody knows that. But these are the folks that make the community. Now, there's challenges in here too, right? The way the schools are located, the way the parks are located, the way the highways are located, creates some splits and some breaks in the town. And we address that in the plan. There's not a lot to do about it. We're not going to move any highways. We're probably not going to change any school boundaries. All right, we're definitely not going to change any school boundaries. But there are things that are going on now and some things to think about that are in the plan that help address the issues that those create. And the spotlight that we picked in this area was really about Rolling Meadows High School and one of the programs that they do that we heard about that struck us as being unusual and special. One of the more important chapters is the one on it being a great place to be, Rolling Meadows being a great place to be. This is a combination of the market assessment and economic development and the land use. In terms of the market assessment, I think we talked about this for half an hour in and of itself at the public hearing, so I'm not going to have the opportunity to do that here. But would tell you just very briefly that the location that Rolling Meadows is in is unique and is terrific, and you're located in the midst of a lot of other things, which is great because the residents can take advantage of what's in Schaumburg and Arlington and Palatine and elsewhere and anywhere in the region. You can get to the airport quickly without having to live in the midst of all of it. What that does is that creates challenges for new markets because the kinds of shops and restaurants and things that people said they really want here, it's difficult to draw them right here in the middle of town because they're so readily available elsewhere. On the other hand, there are opportunities to be had, as AECOM pointed out for us, with the changes in retail. And these are things to be in touch with. And the comprehensive plan, the economic development section in particular, goes into a bit of an overview of what you're doing now and some things that you can continue to do. In terms of land use, here's this land use map. This is the plan, the long-term map. You'll notice that it looks very much like the existing conditions map. Well, not a lot is going to change from a land use standpoint. There will be some, there can be some. There are a couple things that we've highlighted to change. But for the most part, you'll see that it's going to be the same. Those key sub-areas that are mentioned there, one above the bottom, I'll talk about in just a second. The other thing to be addressed is the zoning ordinance. The zoning ordinance is the natural follow of the comprehensive plan, and we'll be working with you and your staff and the commission on that, starting right away. But the land use, or the comprehensive plan is the policy. The zoning is, of course, the ordinance that regulates the development, and one informs the other. The comprehensive plan will inform the zoning. So that's going to be a next step, a follow-up step. So we did look in a little more detail at these 4 sub-areas. We carried over some of the ideas that were significant and worthwhile from the 2006 comprehensive plan. I should mention that we've built on the work that's been done here in the past. We didn't throw out babies in bathwaters. We looked at what was done and carried through those ideas. The list of ideas to be done in a comprehensive plan are not accomplished in a year or 2 or 5. A lot of them you just can't ever get to. So the idea of continuum in the next plan is really quite logical and not unusual. In terms of these ideas, again, we spent an awful lot of time on the details of these at the public hearing. In the interest of time, I won't do it again, but I would let you know that for each of these areas, we talked about what are the key existing conditions, right? What are we working with now? And what are the opportunities for enhancement? And I would tell you that since these are corridors, in each of them we identified some opportunities for really some visual enhancement. You see the wayfinding signage here mentioned again, maybe an opportunity to get across 53. Couple of things that I know are significant to everybody. One is in terms of the Dominic site, really the idea of a mixed use being a combination of townhome density, residential, and commercial outlots from a market standpoint, from a community standpoint, from what we see elsewhere, from what goes on from the market study, really rose to the top in terms of this analysis, and I'm glad to talk about that more if you like. The other thing is that you'll see that it says Kirchhoff Road Corridor District at the top. It does not say downtown. This is a discussion we have in a lot of communities. Downtown creates expectations. Makes me a little twitchy, frankly, when we call corridors like Kirchhoff downtown. It is certainly the center of town. It is certainly the heart and soul of Rolling Meadows. Of that, there is no doubt. But when you say downtown to people, it creates an image. It creates an image of something that's different than what we have. What we want to do is celebrate what we have, not give it an image problem, so to speak. And I can go into more of that. We talked too about the Northwest Industrial District. Again, in the interest of time, I would highlight that we've identified the issues that are here in terms of stormwater and such. But this is really a strong business opportunity. It has been, it should continue to be. We know that you face what so many other communities face, which is people coming to look to do non-industrial, non-business kinds of things in your business, in your industrial area. In working with the Planning and Zoning Commission and looking at this from our standpoint, from a technical standpoint, This is an area that provides opportunity in terms of these industrial businesses, and to the extent that it's possible to keep that going, that's a recommendation of the plan. The Gulf and Algonquin corridors were very interesting, and we sort of divided them up, I would tell you quickly, into a more corporate character, which is Gulf, right? Gallagher and the other office buildings that are there. And Algonquin, and I can jump back and forth, which has got more of a, I forget the phrase that the commission came up with, but it's got kind of a hodgepodge of character, or as we like to call it in planning, mixed use, right? But this is a character that really supports the community. And this hodgepodge, if you will, in and of itself, from a zoning standpoint, from a development standpoint, from a community standpoint, is there's really nothing wrong with it. The issue here, though, is one of character. And there are some sites that are nicely developed with landscaping and quality signage, and there are some sites that really are not. And over time, the public rights-of-way and these private sites really would benefit from that kind of facelift, and there's some ideas for that in the plan. We talked about, in terms of a spotlight for this chapter, we talked about the employers. Again, Rolling Meadows, not a bedroom town, but a town with a lot of bedrooms. Getting around was the transportation chapter. A lot of things in here had to do with, one, identifying this notion that we're not a bedroom town, right? There's 20,000 people a day that come into town. A lot of people leave to go to work. A lot of the ideas in here were about pedestrian and bicycle connections. That's really where transportation is going these days. It's important that people be able to walk and people get around on their bikes. You know, when I was a kid, the bike is how you got to school or you got to the ballpark to play ball. Bikes are now part of people's commuting patterns. They're part of people's fitness patterns. There's a lot more going on with bikes and pedestrian access these days than there ever were. This idea that you see here, the third bullet from the bottom about complete streets, is a recommendation to adopt a policy that really just encourages cities to think not just about streets as being for cars, but also that transportation is also about bikes and pedestrians, and there's a lot in there on that. There are also identified in here some very key roadway connections that can happen as part of future development or future budget processes. Again, some of these going back to the 2006 plan. A little highlight on walkability. We talked about environment and infrastructure. Again, the community is developed. The plan doesn't look to extend utilities somewhere. But there are a couple ideas in here. The one I would highlight that has to do with stormwater is one that we identified in some other work we did, which is, you know, there are big regional stormwater projects, which may or may not give benefit to any particular property holder or some of the folks in the industrial area that we talked about that have issues with flooding. There are site-specific things that a neighbor or a resident or a business can do on their own. But there are also things that are best solved by getting a few property owners together. These are not necessarily things that the city would be doing, but the city has an opportunity to kind of be the coordinator of. And there's some recommendations and some thoughts in the plan on how to do those kinds of things. And also a few notions in there acknowledging Salt Creek as an amenity as much as it is a part of the stormwater management system. And with the idea to highlight environmental aspects as opportunities and community assets, pointed to some of the work of the Environmental Committee. So I'll close by again highlighting this notion that implementing a plan is something that happens in three ways. One is part of an annual review, right? It's the sort of thing that perhaps the Planning and Zoning Commission gets together on an annual basis, looks at all the recommendations, which are the next series of slides, which in the interest of time I won't go into in a ton of detail, and then they perhaps make some recommendations to you, and you as the council have the final look at them and say, you know what, this one's not ripe yet. Let's see how this looks next year. Or this one's interesting. I heard there's some grant money for this. Let's do that. You do that on an annual basis. People always ask, well, how often should we be redoing our plan? I don't know. But you should look at it every year, right? If the economy changes completely on us again, redo the plan. 5 years, 10 years, it's probably time to look at redoing the plan. But really look at it every year for those ideas that the community, the commission, your staff, so many other people got together and shared. The other is to keep these recommendations in mind when you receive development proposals, right? Those goals and objectives that are in here that talk about what the community can be and wants to be, those can be informative when you consider those. And finally, when the unexpected comes up, when a development opportunity comes before you, again, these are some rules, some ideas, some best practices to keep in mind as you move forward. The plan is full of, here, watch this. These are all the recommendations that are in the plan. You can't do all of these. This can't even go fast enough. You can't do all of these in 1 year. Not all of these are ripe this year. But these are the things you should look at on a regular basis to see if you should do it. And they're all in the plan, and they're described in plenty of detail. Some of them will be ripe, some of them will not, but they're in there for you all to sort through. I love to tell the story that when I was a community development director once, we got a plan from a consultant, and it was one of those plans where, I don't know if you've seen these, where in the back there's 20 pages with the chart, with the spreadsheet, and it's 8-point type, and everything's a high priority to do in the next fiscal year, and it also says community development on it. That's not an implementation plan. That's a reason to go home and have a beer. So the ideas that are listed here, I ran out of slide, are not all to do next year. We've talked about them in highest, medium, and lesser priorities. Be great to do the high priorities in the next 3 to 5 years, the medium in the next 7 to 10, and the other ones beyond that. But just because it's a lesser priority doesn't mean it's less important, doesn't mean it shouldn't be done. It might be something that's going to take longer to do. And I'm glad to go into all of these in as much detail as you want. As the commission and the staff will tell you, I really could talk about this all night long, but I know you have an agenda and things to touch on. And if you have any questions, I would certainly be more than happy to answer them.
First off, I would say thank you. It is very thorough, and I would strongly encourage all the residents to read through it. Some of us had to read through it twice, and we're still working on it as we're going through it. Just a quick question. You'd mentioned, and I was reading this with other communities about the bike, pedestrians traveling. How much does that become like a priority as you're going forward with cities? Because I notice we've had some discussion about what to do with bike paths in the city of Rolling Meadows. So just briefly, don't have to, just briefly what.
More than we used to.
Okay.
And it's a priority because it's more than just riding your bike to the park. It's now part of commuting. It's about shopping. It's about bringing people from outside the town into the town. So we're seeing quite a bit more of it.
Okay. Thank you. Further questions? Thank you, sir.
I thank you for your time. Community's done a great job with it, and we appreciate the chance to work with you.
And if I may, just reminder again, tomorrow night is the Planning and Zoning Commission workshop on the comprehensive plan update. Their public hearing continuation will be Tuesday, March 5th. And hopefully, if we get a favorable finding from the Planning and Zoning Commission to recommend this plan moving forward, you will see this towards the end of March for ordinance consideration, which is the process we need to go through to do formal adoption of the plan. So again, comments, questions are welcome by any of you. Collectively, send us an email, give us a call. Appreciate your input. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, utility rate update. Mr. Comstock, Mrs. Gallagher.
Obviously, we're back again, and we do have Baxter Woodman just to walk through the final study that was actually done. This was an update from the 2015 study. Obviously, part of the 2019 bond actually has some underground utility work that we will be doing with this. Obviously, all of you know Chris. He'll be up in just a little bit to walk you through this, but again, we are following this. We do greatly appreciate the ad hoc capital improvement committee, Alderman Williams and Alderman Diastis, who sit on it. They've actually seen a little bit more of this, and obviously some of the discussions that have happened over the time. So with that, I will turn it over to Finance Director Melissa Gallagher, who will do the intro before Chris comes in.
Thank you, Mr. Crumstock. In the City Council packet tonight, we have a write-up and a summary for the utility rate study. And before I turn it over to Chris Buckley of the engineering firm Baxter & Woodman, I did want to just give you a little bit of background information. Within the packet itself, we also have the draft utility rate study, and that is in final draft form. There will be a few tweaks to it, and we'll remove the marker draft. What I did want to point out in tonight, this is a planning tool, and it has been worked on for some time now. Baxter & Woodman has completed the analysis for the city's water, sewer, and stormwater rates, and the city is striving towards rate and capital stabilization for its residents and businesses. And the reason that we're doing this is to make sure that we're planning appropriately and then also working on these pieces for our budget and for our capital plan. The reason for this study also is to make sure that we're also covering our expenditures for our operating, our capital, and our debt service, and also making sure that we have reserves appropriately for future budgets. The rate study scenarios were presented in December at the the Committee of the Whole meeting, and we've also presented to the Ad Hoc Capital Improvements Committee. And through that process, we've discussed the project plan in terms of the bonds, as we've mentioned, and then also through the entire project plan for capital for the next 5 years. And so before I turn over to Chris Buckley of Baxter & Woodman, one of the things that will be highlighted as well is the fact that one of the key drivers to making sure you have sound financial planning for your utilities fund is making sure overall that you have a reserve fund balance policy at some point. It's about $2 to $2.5 million per year that you should have on reserves. That's something we're striving towards, as we have done in other funds. We are making sure that we're first achieving that before we come back with a formal policy at some point. What we're trying to do today is present that to you at the February 26th City Council meeting. We'll have this as a resolution for acceptance by the City Council. And then we would use this as part of our budget plan and our capital plan, and making sure we're looking at this annually and adjusting as necessary. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Chris Buckley of Baxter & Woodman, and happy to answer any questions afterwards. Chris?
Thank you, sir.
Mayor, Chris Buckley with Baxter & Woodman.
Thank you, sir.
Mayor,
Appreciate
City
it.
Council.
I know the residents at home appreciate it too. Thank you.
And residents at home and attendees, thank you for having me. So we've talked about or listened to Committe talk about down power wires and the community plan, which was, I found, absolutely fascinating. So unfortunately, at around 8:30, we're going to get into water rates. But the news on this, I think, is pretty good, and I'm not going to dawdle too much on the presentation. We'll go through it fairly quickly, and please stop me if you have any questions or comments. So, what was done as part of this study as an update to the 2015 study was looking at the cost of service and capital debt issuance, and what does it cost to operate the water, sewer, and stormwater utility now and in the future? And what if the city issues a $4 million in capital debt and restructures its CIP? So those kind of one of the big focuses of the study. As Melissa mentioned, rate stabilization analysis. What rate increases, if any, are necessary to provide both financially sound and fair and equitable utility funding? Discussions with city staff, and then report and presentations to the City Council. So now we are basically at the end of those 4 points. So we prepared 4 scenarios. The baseline scenario is fairly obvious, as there's no rate increases. So you're looking at your expenses going out 5 years and seeing what's going to happen if you don't raise the rates at all. The baseline scenario number 2, or the baseline scenario version 2.0, is looking at the baseline as you've been doing in the past, which has been a 7.55 rate increase. 7.55 refers to a 7% increase in water rates, 5% increase to sewer, and 5% increase to sanitary, storm sewer, and then sanitary sewer. So that's what the rate increases have been for the last few years, and so that's a scenario. The meat of it, though, is we're getting into the $4 million bond scenario. And what happens if we don't do a rate increase but issue the bond? And then what do we do? What happens if we do the $4 million bond increase as well as raise the rates? How does that affect the fund? Okay, so couple of things as groundwork here that I've spoken about before, but we'll go over it really briefly. We're doing this over 5 years, and this is looking at more or less cash flow. Based on the cost of service analysis, the volume of water billed, or the revenue, projected to remain flat. This is a conservative approach, which means that any growth that happens is a benefit. So we project how much water you're expected to get, looking back at the last few years, keep that flat going forward. If you get more, fantastic. If you get less, hopefully that won't necessarily happen, but it is possible. Operating expenditures were inflationary increases. So we look at the cost of the water, soon to be about 2.5%, 5% per annum. So JAWA is selling you that water. It seems like we're past the ridiculous rate increases that the city of Chicago was passing on in the last 5 years. They seem to have settled down. And so it's back to more of an inflationary increases in the low single digits. That also goes for increases in expenses for operating your water system. And I'll touch on that a little bit later. Fully funded capital improvements program, so we'll talk briefly about that. And then maintaining a fund balance. This is the difference between revenues and expenses, very similar to a checkbook. Should remain at or below the operating reserve goal, which was established in 2015 of about $2 million. And I'll talk also briefly about how that was established. One thing to touch on is that water consumption, both for Rolling Meadows and across the region, is generally on a slight decline. Over the last few years, based on water conservation, as well as, quite frankly, water bills going up, we've seen a decrease in the amount of water that is being utilized. So it is, in terms of a business perspective, it's a little bit on the negative side for trying to maintain adequate revenues. This is the baseline scenario for the CIP, which is the Capital Improvement Program. And the various colors, which are a little washed out in this, show the difference between water, sewer, and sanitary sewer. And as you can see, in this particular instance, for the next 5 years, you're focusing quite a bit on the water system. That would be replacing water mains, leak detection, all that kind of fun stuff. And then the other ones are replacing sewers or cleaning sewers, doing that sort of operational improvements, storm sewers, that sort of thing. And you can see it pretty much varies from about $2 million a year up to $3 million a year on average across the way. Now this is for the baseline scenario. You'll see a slightly different version when we get into the other scenarios. Okay, so as I mentioned, the reserve operating goal, American Water Works Association and the Government Finance Officers Association, GFOA, typically recommends the following. Utilities maintain an operating reserve of 25% of their annual operating expenses. This is excluding capital and debt service. The goal of the fund balance has been set by these various communities at this level. So for you guys, the operating reserve goal is about $2 million. So what is this? This is cash in the bank in case you have some sort of catastrophe, a real drop in expenses, whatever it might be. It's just a cushion that gives you some flexibility in your both planning and in your operations. That reserve amount is flexible, but as a benchmark, 25% is kind of what is strived for by most communities. Okay, so scenario number one. This is the baseline. No increases in rates. Projecting out to about 2023. The blue line is the fund balance, or the goal that we would like. And the red line is essentially the fund balance. And no surprise, it starts out, you have your fund balance is fairly a little bit higher than goal right now, but they start to decrease down to a ski slope type of thing to where you get almost close to zero and actually almost below zero by 2023. So not doing anything is not recommended because it's getting you below your goal in about 2 years and then getting in financial trouble at the end of 5 years. So this is just that scenario that kind of describes the what if on no rate increases. Scenario two then is what would happen if you're doing what you've been doing for the last few years with the 755 increase. Now, what we see here is that with the capital improvements, you kind of motor along on your balances pretty much the same as you've got now for 3 or 4 years. Then as you get down towards the end of the study, the costs start to go up. And that's because of the capital improvement has kind of been exhausted, and now you're getting in more revenue than you really need. So in this one, it's a good scenario. Gives you plenty of money in your fund balance. Is it the best scenario? Well, let's talk about that. The $4 million bond scenario. Assumptions are the per cost of service analysis with a $4 million bond issued in January 2019. So we're talking about the same expenses that you've had and the same water revenues, but now you get a shot in the arm from the $4 million bond, which is basically what a bond is. Based on that, the city would improve or revise its capital improvement plan to accommodate the influx of cash. Mainly, you're going to shift those projects to get them done quicker and take advantage of the money that you have. So now this is what the $4 million bond scenario looks like. Remember the previous one, we were motoring along at $2 to $3 million per year. This one indicates that now we're going to do a lot of this work up front and do it as quickly as we can. And then we taper off for the next 3 to 4 to 5 years. Okay? So now this one shows that we motor along pretty well, very similar to the 755, and we actually start to decrease back towards the goal line at the end of 5 years. Now I note that this is without any rate increases. So the city is issuing a bond, and they will be receiving that money and then paying debt service based on market interest rates, and that debt service payments are included in this scenario. So basically, just like most people do, you are leveraging the cost of these projects over time in order to not take wild hits in your account and drive up the rates. So this is a positive scenario where you kind of get what you want without increasing the rates. And it provides rate stabilization, as we have been talking about. The final scenario is really just for kicks. Well, let's say we do that $4 million bond and keep the 755 increases. Well, as we can see, there's plenty of money in the bank to do all sorts of things, but from a fiduciary aspect, it's not recommended because you're bringing in more revenue than you really need, and that's not the goal of any type of enterprise fund. So this one has the $4 million, 755, not something that we're recommending. So we recommend, and the city has thus far agreed, that scenario 3, the $4 million bond without any rate increases, will provide rate stabilization and alleviate concerns of substantial rate increases going forward over the next few years, at least 3 or 4 years, if not 5. And you maintain your $2 million or more operating reserve goal in any given year. A couple of notes. The city has been really working on reducing the expenses in addition to obviously trying to improve the system through capital expenditures and doing the rate study to figure out the best financial model, but they've been really taking a stab at ways to reduce the day-to-day expenses. Some of this has been on telecommunications, where telecommunication lines were being leased from the phone company for quite a bit of money, and that has been changed now to try to reduce, provide the same telecommunications but at a lower rate. Updating the billing and how billing was done, and a couple of other items are all aimed and been successful at reducing expenses. So moving forward, we have been again recommending the scenario 3 to be implemented, and then you should continue to monitor the fund balance year to year and see if there's anything happens. It's very similar to what they were talking about on the comprehensive plan. Should redo the whole study in 5 years and that sort of thing, but every year kind of take a look at it and see where you are in those charts. The city may want to consider low rate increases to maintain a cost of living adjustment each year in a couple of years. Maybe it's 5 years, but maybe it's 4 or 3 years. It's hard to predict exactly what's going to happen by that time. The point is that residents and businesses don't like supply shocks. They don't like rate shocks. So the 2 to 3 or 4% increases that can help you motor along and maintain healthy fund balances are typically better than the 10 or 15% increases and no increases and then a shock. So every year to take a look at it and see if you're not going to increase the rates this year or next year or the year after, maybe start looking at possible bumps 4 to 5 years. So that's the recommendation moving forward. And that's pretty much the sum of it. Welcome any questions or comments.
It was fun-filled and entertaining. Any questions from the council? Mr. Budmetz, sir, was that your hand?
It was.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the question is, in your presentation, you said that the bond for $4 million would be repaid from the funds generated out of this account. So there really is, do we need to earmark that, or that automatically happens, or there, but like there's no increases at all, or 1%, 2%, something?
No, based on the fact that you have adequate reserves now and actually a little more money in the bank above the reserve, and the way you're basically kind of spending the money as you get it, then the debt service, which I believe is 20 years payment for the bonds, that's been factored in as an expense. So you take that $4 million and now you spread it out over 20 years with that interest rate, it's easy to absorb. And so no, you don't need to increase the rates at this time because it's already been factored in and accounted for, and you're not taking that big hit of cash. You have pushed that off over 20 years. So just like a car or a house, your monthly payments are lower and it can be accommodated much easier.
Okay.
Any other questions? Thank you. Moving right along, it's Fred, Mr. Vogt, I guess you're back up here again. Brookwood area proposed stormwater improvements updates.
So as Fred comes back up, obviously most of you around the room will remember that we've talked about Brookwood. This is another update that we have, and also there's new representation that has been meeting and has met with Public Works Director Fred Vogt, and that's why we're bringing this back with some of the additional items.
Thank you, Barry. Yeah, this is a project that has been in the making for over 10 years, since the 2007, 2008 flood events were experienced, and every time we felt we got a little bit of input or efforts into the project to move forward with it, it was like taking one step forward and 1 or 2 steps back. We've had a number of meetings with the Brookwood Homeowners Associations over the years, city engineer, city attorney, myself. Got to about 2015, and we thought we had, because we had provided at a public meeting there in their association meeting room, a lot of good feedback from residents that were there, but didn't get enough voters or people that reside there to support the city's effort to acquire an easement to do the stormwater improvements that we have there. And keep in mind that we did get a grant from the state roughly in 2010, 2011, that even though its funding has been frozen, is still technically alive, and we hope that that funding will be available should there be a real project. But very difficult period in 2018 in terms of communication. It was almost none. It was almost seemingly resistant to have any discussion with regards to this project, whether we would, as a city, have to pursue condemnation to get an easement in order to do a stormwater project that affects and would benefit a number of the neighboring properties upstream, to the south, to the west, to the southwest. All of a sudden, a few weeks ago, we received a Freedom of Information request for records for the Brookwood Homeowners Association and the stormwater detention area in particular for the last 3 years, and doing an inquiry as to, well, what was this information sought for? It turns out that there have been several newly elected people on their association board. And the information request is based on some of those new people wanting to see if this is a project that could move forward. So I stand here tonight reporting that, if it's really in their hands, but staff is definitely willing to communicate with them. We have given them the information that they requested. They came and looked through our files and asked for certain things to be provided to them through the Freedom of Information process. So we will follow up in due time and see if there's any interest in having dialogues, getting their attorney to, again, communicate with our city attorney to move the project forward. We gave them the concept plans that were prepared by our city engineer 2 or 3 years ago. They indicated two things to me. One, they hope to keep the cost as low as they could on their part, and they were concerned about not losing any parking. And I think from a parking standpoint, our engineer has done well to design a couple of options that minimizes or avoids any parking impact at all, depending on which direction they want to go. So that's the report that we have right now. It's more favorable in the short term than it has been for quite some time, but we'll see where we go with this. If there's any questions or comments.
Questions or comments from the council? Yes, Mr. Mundez.
If I recall, wasn't there talk that we were begin condemnation proceedings because of the impact to the neighbors? And then whatever happened with that, we just didn't, or?
It didn't go forward during the past year and a half. I think part of it is just the inability to make any contact with their legal representation. I don't want to put our city attorney on the spot, but it really kind of fell at that point. We tried to do everything we could from the staff standpoint to avoid condemnation proceedings, and every once in a while we'd get an indication from their board that, and their president in particular, that we can meet. We've looked at the plans, but then they would postpone it. So we still feel that condemnation is the avenue of last resort. We'll come back to the council if we can't make inroads, but I think at least the door's apparently open a little bit here, and we'll see where we can go with it.
And do we anticipate this as being another, I don't know, use of term, but stall tactic, or do we think that this is a genuine switch?
Given that it's different people that have contacted us than the past group that was on the board, I'm hoping that it's not a stall tactic. I don't have any reason to think that it is at this point.
And I think some of them were being brought up to speed because some of them thought we were the ones who had already approved it, and why hasn't it been done? So part of that sit-down was also showing them how we're trying to save some parking spots. So it was a real educational group that came in and really asked a lot of good questions after they looked through it. So we're really hoping that's nail steering, but we still have the same concern that they still have to vote 51% of the owners, and that's still, there are renters in there, but we believe that the new group that is working on this actually has some additional force to do it. And some of them who are now on the new board are actually from the building that most of the flooding was from.
And also, we had back 2-3 years ago discussions with the immediate adjoining residents at Jody Court with regards to impact there. We talked about special service area. We had gone to the extent of calculating out what the cost would be per property owner, whether it was single-family homes, whether it was the townhomes. We had previous discussions with Palatine Township Highway Department about potential contribution. They were certainly on board at one time a few years ago, but what I've indicated to the representatives is that anything and everything is on the table at this point. From what we've talked before, let's just see where we can go, what things are important to them, what things are lesser important to them, and see if we can put a viable project together.
I'm sorry, are you looking to be recognized, Mr.? I have no idea.
Raising
Mr.
my
Yes,
hand.
I just have no idea.
I'm
Mr.
raising my
Mayor
hand.
will do. Thank you. Go
Mr.
ahead.
Mayor, I'm raising my hand.
Thank you.
This project has gone on indefinitely, I think. And I know the people at Jody Court seem to suffer. Can we establish a timeline or a series of timelines where a month or 2 months or 3 months and a recontact, and a month or 2 months and 3 months and a recontact, so that we've got something and you can come back and report to us? Because, I mean, at some point in time, we need to pull the trigger and start procedures. Can we set something up so that this doesn't take another 10 years?
Well, could we make the suggestion that once a month that we get a report from staff?
That would be fine.
Fine. Mr., who would you like, Mr. Comstock or
No,
Mr. Vogt to?
Mr. Vogt will put it into his Friday letters once a month, but the group who actually met, they actually know that we're having this meeting tonight, so hopefully they're watching. But at the same point in time, this also gives them a timetable that the council would like this to move along, and I guess that after we do a period of time, we'll be back if people don't see any movement from them.
If council wishes to make that commitment or emphasize, or have staff emphasize at times of the essence, we want to move quickly, we would appreciate any direction that you give us.
Well, I understand, because that was also, when I was an alderman, this has been an issue for some time. Could we, direction from council be that on the first of the month, first packet of the month, that we get we get what's happening in Brookwood, so that we have, as Alderman Diaz has suggested, every month, we know that at the beginning of the month, we're going to have a report on this. Is that?
We can certainly do that. We'll be happy to do so, and hopefully that in itself can be an impetus to move the project along on their end.
Any other questions? Do I have a motion to adjourn? Mr. Banger's made it. It has been seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?